Hello, everyone, and welcome yet again to our interviews with subject experts on the unfolding COVID-19 pandemic and the different waves it is taking and the mutations that are emerging and causing a lot of concern. The Indian Express Group on its FE digital platform has been reaching out to experts who have been looking and studying the cases, the developments in India closely over the past 18 months and also bring in global perspective. And therefore, we are absolutely delighted to have Brahma Mukherjee, a professor of biostatistics and epidemiology at the School of Public Health at the University of Michigan, a highly reputed expert who is a go-to voice in this space and in these trying times, who's looked in terms of what is happening, the actions required, and the projections which we need to consider. So anyone who has tracked her observations and the work which can be reached out, which one could reach at home in 19, would get an idea of the predictions that she's been making. For instance, one of which was of how we will be hitting a peak this month in India, and the kind of both in terms of cases and deaths. We are almost there, and there are different views based on data in terms of where we are on the peaks and how it will unfold. The concerns now are really on the kind of short term and the immediate measures. What is it that we need to do over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Those kind of questions, and how do we prepare for the days and months ahead? Those are some of the questions. So thank you so much, Professor, for your time. It's really, we are really grateful that you've been able to take time out and speak to us. And thank you so much again, Professor.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if I may begin with Professor, I've been reading and following whatever you've been saying for a long time. And one thing which has always stayed with me was this comment you said that we need to trace the silent footsteps of this insidious virus. Now, how silent is this virus today, and how insidious forms is it taking today? If we can begin from there. And I'm saying from an Indian perspective.
Yeah, so, that was much more relevant in the beginning part when we started to see the uptick, because the treacherous thing with this virus is that when in February, I started tweeting that we see upticks in 3 states, then the total case counts and the total death counts were at a level like 10,000 cases and 200 deaths. You probably cannot convince people that we need to intensify your measures. But if you actually wait till you see the cases and deaths to convince people, yes, we need lockdown, it's already too late, because the virus has an incubation period, has an infection period, and also exponential growth is sort of the nature that it comes in slowly, but then explodes, right? So as modelers, we send out this cautionary alarming notes and projections, not because we want to see them happen. We want to actually create and emulate this devastating reality in the computer so that we do not have to see it unfold in society. And we hope that policymakers will actually see the projections and act even though there are not enough cases on the ground. And that's why it has been treacherous to track this pandemic worldwide, because once you have so many cases and deaths, it's already out of control. So that's what I mean, that even as this wave subsides, as we prepare a surveillance system, we really have to take small upticks seriously and try to curb it, arrest it. And small number of cases actually are much easier to actually arrest and also contact trace and treat if we can identify those clusters. When it goes into like this and we have no grip on where the infections are and how much the infection is, it's a lost cause.
Yes. So where do you see India today in terms of, where we are standing in terms of the way we look at the caseload, the unfolding of the different waves? What is the big concern now? I mean, what is the immediate, say, over the next 2 weeks, what can we expect? Over the next 1 month, what we can expect? If you can throw some light in terms of where we stand and where we are headed.
Yes, so I'll give you the good news first. I think that I said in many of my previous writing that April is going to be the cruelest month. And in mid-May, we are going to see sort of a plateauing and a peak. Of course, with the limited testing, we cannot conjecture and even estimate the height of the peak because there are so many infections right now, and it's the ones that you're reporting is a function of how much you're testing. But I do feel that the general overwhelming growth has slowed down in many parts of the country, and that's because the shelter-at-home orders have kicked in major states like Delhi and Maharashtra, and gradually kicking in Karnataka, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu. So I think that that's why we are seeing an overall slowing down. But we have to keep in mind that India is a nation which is really a composite of many nations. So some states are safe. That does not mean all states are safe. We see a cluster emerging in the Northeast around Assam. We have to be prepared that in every state and at a district level, at a granular level, if we see the uptakes, we have to be really staying prepared. So what we expect in terms of projections is that in the next 2 weeks, I believe that the cases are going to go down. Deaths are actually, according to our models, are declining at a slower rate. So still, if we think that, we have gotten used to sort of 415,000 is bad, but 350,000 cases is also really bad. No other nation in the world have reported this many cases and this many deaths. So we are still in a deep crisis. We have to put our best foot forward. And the next 2 months in May and June, there is going to be need for hospitalization and deaths are going to happen. So if we want to go back and revert back to the time of February, last February when this all started, then it will probably not be until July or August when we can get that state of containment across all states.
When we as journalists meet people, the first question which most ask is, when will this pandemic end? So at a larger issue of when will this pandemic end, what forms you see over the next few years, some sense that you can give in terms of, how you see the picture emerging, while I very well understand the point that each state will have its own peak. So if you can give a picture on that. And second, the short-term recommendation.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll answer first, that when will this pandemic end? I think we all are anxious about that. For India, I think that this wave is going to last, right? We are still having to deal with a large number of cases. It does not go from 350,000 to magically to 10,000. So it will take a couple of months for us to get to that level. It all depends on vaccination. I am in the United States where we were in a very deep crisis and also feeling very down in January. But the whole vaccination plan actually changed the morale and the outlook in the country. So I think we are not helpless. We do not have to surrender to this insidious virus. We have our strategies. So we have to figure out what is the strategy for India. And again, even if this wave subsides, we have to keep in mind that this is not the last wave. This is not the last variant. We as a country have to stay prepared for the nth wave. I don't want to talk about the third wave or the fourth wave. If we invest in infrastructure, we always be prepared for the nth wave. And yes, that infrastructure is going to cost us investment and cost us sincere intention and data transparency. But in the long run, it will safeguard India against any future health crisis, even if the waves do not come. And so if vaccination is our strategy, so coming back to recommendations, short-term recommendations and long-term recommendations. So I feel that there is no dearth of recommendations and predictions. What India really needs is actions. So I do believe that in the short term, of course, we have to take care of the patients and the families, because we need to really scale up our healthcare infrastructure. We have to navigate COVID care so that the right medications are given at the right time. We have to scale up our oxygen production. And so we have to take care of the nearly 4 million active cases of COVID. Even if we do not have any new infection, there is 4 million active cases of COVID in India. We have to take care of them. So that's the first thing. At the same time, we really need to scale up our vaccination, and we need to scale up our genomic sequencing and share that data with the broader world so that people can understand the properties of these new variants. And we need to sequence strategically so that we can understand, are the vaccines effective against these variants? Is there any kind of immunity from past infection against these variants? So we really, really need that. And the other thing, I think, which is long-term, I want to mention, and this has not been mentioned many times, but I think it's incredibly important based on my research in the United States, is post-COVID syndromes and long COVID syndromes. We will have a large number of Indians who are going to struggle with their health. And do we have the infrastructure to bear that? And the millions of families that are bereaved, we really have to think about how to support them in terms of economic support as well as social and mental health support. So if we think that we have reached the peak and it's going to be all glorious from here onwards, that will be another mistake to declare premature victory. And we do not want to do that.
I want to come to, I'll come a little while later on how science should inform policy making and what we need to do about it, and some of the aspects on how specifics we need to look at 1 or 2 points. But before that, if I can just look at the data, there is always the issue whether, not just in India, globally, there is always the problem that there is underreporting happening, that the actual caseload is much higher. So has been the argument against India as well, that the actual numbers are much higher than this. What multiples of the actual numbers, how does it look like in India? How much of underreporting you think is happening in India, and on what basis? Suppose if we say that the actual number is, say, 20 times more than what is actually happening in India, on what basis do we say that? You can just give a sense on that. So that will help us a lot.
So the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare released the seroprevalence survey, the national survey, in January. So let us go back to January. And it said that 1 out of 5, or 21.5% people in India had the antibody. And this is the adult population of India. So you can do a simple math to say that that sort of tells you that 178 million infections. And at that time, India was reporting only 11 million. And you divide 178 by 11, you get an underreporting factor around 16. So that's not using any of our models, that's just using the government release data to estimate. And so far, we have always estimated an underreporting factor between 10 and 20 for infections and 2 to 5 for deaths. And this is for wave 1 data. And what I have seen and realized many studies coming out in wave 2 is because the reporting system is broken, everybody is overwhelmed, and also deaths are happening outside hospitals, which are harder to capture. It's this underreporting factor has only gone up. So what we said 2 to 5, maybe 4 to 5, that implies that we are reporting to about 260,000 deaths right now. And the real cost may have been nearly 1 million or 1.2 million. So we have to appreciate these numbers, because behind every number, there is a face of a person, but also their families and friends that they are leaving behind.
So today you're saying, what would be if you, even at the risk of repeating, what would you say is the current number that we should actually have in mind? I'm repeating this and I'm emphasizing this point so that everyone who's listening knows that actually what number are we talking of today in India? What would that be?
So reported numbers are 24 million cases nearly, and our reported deaths are around 260,000, right? And so according to all the data that we have seen, I believe that there is 15 times more infections potentially that will take you to around 340 million infections. And then the number of deaths is nearly 1 million to 1.25 million COVID-related deaths. And recently there was a study that came out, I just saw this morning, from Gujarat, which says that deaths were underreported by a factor of 10 to 15. So I think that there is a lot of heterogeneity across India in terms of this. The way to validate this, to answer this question, is really to have accurate death reporting system in general, where we can actually get the all-cause mortality data from 2020 and 2021 and see what has happened. Many countries have actually done this excess death calculation, and found out that what they attributed to COVID, the real toll of COVID has been much more. So I think we have a mechanism to actually quantify this with the right data. We cannot really operate in a data vacuum and a policy vacuum.
The uniqueness of what's happening in India is what is happening in India in some sense, going by how we have seen the waves and the virus unfold globally. Is there something unique in the way things are unfolding in India, whether in terms of the age profile, whether in terms of the way mutations are manifesting? Is there something different about the way things are unfolding in India, which will need a much more, shall we say, nuanced policy approach or whatever?
So, of course, what has happened in India is very unique. Otherwise, India would not have reported 414,000 cases and more than 4,000 deaths, the highest daily number that any country has reported so far. So obviously something special is going on, and that is because that there was a data uptick, and from February this has been growing, and people have lived in data denial and also reality check. Super spreader events like large gatherings and political rallies and religious gatherings have added fuel to the fire. And you have a perfect virus and infection inferno here, because which is a confluence of different factors, including disregard of COVID appropriate behavior right at the time when the country was opening up, circulation of these new variants, all of these large super spreader events. So all coincided at the right time. The virus was getting ready for its third round and second round, but we were not. And the more the virus spreads, the more it changes. So, of course, this landscape of newly emerging variants, 617, 618, we really need to know more information about these variants. And some of the initial studies show that vaccines still offer protection. So our way out of this pandemic is really, to sustain this wave and then vaccinate, really vaccinate, take your vaccines. About the profile, again, I have seen studies from Maharashtra. I have seen data from some particular states about who is hospitalized, who is infected, and who are dying from COVID. And this data, why isn't that readily available for all of India, so that instead of putting up conjectures that there is a difference in people who got affected in the profiles in wave 1 and wave 2, we can actually see this? Because this is something that the government should be able to produce, that what is the age and sex stratified disaggregated breakdown of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. We need to know, because that really is important finding. So another thing is that this younger people getting infected, we saw that to some extent in Michigan in the last wave as well. And a reason for that was twofold. One is that elderly people, large fraction of them got vaccinated. And I don't think that's true to that extent in India. But India also has 6.4% of its population 65 plus, whereas US has 16.5% 65 plus. India is a much younger population. But also that, middle age group people actually went out back in the workforce. So their risk profile, people who were taking a lot of caution last year, were up and about, they're using public transportation, the kids were going to school. So a lot of changes happened in the life of the working population from last year to this year. For elderly people, I think life, because they don't go out back in the workforce, probably their ways of exposure did not change as much. And so it could explain a part of this, what we are hearing. But also right now, what we are seeing is not just the clinical property of the virus. People who could have been saved with oxygen, with treatment, are dying because of the hospital and healthcare bottleneck right now. So I think that is also causing this excess death. We can quantify all of these if we have granular level data. We do not have to really get into conjectures about variants, about the variants' effectiveness against vaccines, about the age breakdown, because data can answer that. Science and data can answer these questions.
Granular data and data evidence-based policy formulation, which will actually be most effective. And I want to end with that. because I think you bring in a global perspective. We have seen waves abroad, and the first wave and second wave in US, for example, what it made them, how it ensured that you make a state of preparedness for the third wave, so to say.
India's solution has to be devised based on the Indian context. And as you mentioned, that it is very important to pick up things at a very local level, not just the central level. There's a hierarchy of things that are going on here. For example, in the central level, at the state government level, at the district level. So epidemiology and surveillance really is at the heart of managing this pandemic. And so we have to pay attention to that. For example, if you cannot do testing, we can always do fever surveys. We can always do syndromic surveillance. For example, we can also do sampling of wastewater and sewage water to keep a track of what is going on, right? In the rural areas, we can set up these wastewater testing mechanisms, which many scientists in India have worked on. So I think India can build its own model. It does not have to borrow from the West, because the community health workers, using the community health workers at a grassroots level for syndromic surveillance or wastewater sampling, these things can be built in. There's enough knowledge and science that the whole world community has produced in the last 1 year and now more, that the whole world should benefit from, and we should embrace that science and utilize that in practice.
Okay, that's so very, very important and very nice, Professor. We run out of time. Thank you so much for taking time out and taking us through this. And hope we probably, we'll see some of this unfolding and perhaps some of the policy correctives put in place. So thank you so much for your time. We will keep in touch, and thank you again, and please stay safe.